get psyched.
Half the time it works, half the time it doesn't work, and the half the time that doesn't work is when I get started. I'm like, oh, I'm gonna test it out before I get going. No, it just doesn't work out. And oh god, there we go. All right, welcome in everybody. Wednesday night stream. Whew. I'm excited for this one. I'm gonna be talking about weed. Hopefully I don't get banned. Fingers crossed I don't get banned. But we are going to be talking about, hey, social work. Hey, Ramdas. We're going to be talking about some weed tonight. We're going to be talking about the history of weed. This is the first time that I am exploring this topic I've talked about cannabis before on Twitch. But this is the first time I'm in the politics category, and I have a little bit of a provocative title about the racist history. So we're going to talk about that for sure. I've read most of a book that I picked up today. I was hoping to get it from the library, but that didn't happen, so I ended up buying it. Natty Science, yes. Legalize all drugs. Yeah, so we'll talk about that because the Narcotics Act of 1970 really set the stage for where we're at now. So that was what, 50 some years? That was 51 years ago. You know nothing about the history. Awesome. I love it. I love it because this history is wild. I knew it was racist. Far more racist than I actually like. Convincing the country of India to sign on to the United Nations single scheduling in 1961. Convincing India. Oh my god! Like, wow. Hey, Psych Queen, welcome in. What is that? Is that like it's a idea, psych idea. Love it. I love that. It's amazing. Yeah. So anyways, I've got a poll going on because we are going to talk about the legalization debate, hence why I'm in the politics category tonight. And I think it's funny. We're going to be talking about weed, but I've got wine. So you have some understanding, Natty, about what's happened since Nixon. Yeah, Nixon has played a crucial role in how weed has been, how marijuana has been classified and its 50-year history, right? I'm watching me on Apple TV right now, so hard to actually chat. That's wild. I wonder. What they should do is so the Roku Twitch app sucks. But you know what they should do? They should like make a chat only app. So if you watch it on TV, then you can still chat on like your phone or whatever. I don't know, or the computer. I know you're probably pulling double duty on this one. Yeah. So big screen. Oh boy. 55-inch pizza. Love it. I love it. Thank you. That's awesome. So, yeah, we are going to jump into that. So, cannabis. The reason why I come to you from this on a Psych channel is because this cannabis itself is, and learning about everything about it. It's such a rich history. But before I switch screens and show you what's going on, where I want to take this discussion, because I was doing a lot of reading today, but everything about cannabis from a psychological perspective is super interesting to me. But with cannabis always comes a debate about what it is and how it should be consumed, viewed in the public square. And like I said, the history of cannabis in the United States is wildly crazy. It's wild, right? And so as a psychologist, it's super interesting to me where those two things meet, because I know what it is from a psychological and especially biopsychological perspective. I know what cannabis does. I know what it does in your brain. I know what it does to your body and all of that. And all of what we currently know about cannabis, which by far is way too less, because we could have known so much more about it, especially the therapeutic idea, had it not been for this history, right? So that in and of itself is super fascinating to me, and I'm super glad that I picked up this book. I want to make sure I plug that book because it's quite an easy read. Okay. Wait a minute. What? Oh, I know what I did. Pull Mape. There it is. There we go. Let me move stuff around, because I actually don't need that to be so big. So we can all see that. There we go. If I do that, that stays around. Okay, cool. All right, so there's the poll. Ignore the no vote, because that's wrong. I shouldn't have copied and pasted. That was naughty of me. I shouldn't have done that. Poll Mape got mad at me. Poll Mape bot got mad at me. And I was like, "Oh, I see you said you voted for that." Okay, yeah, all right, whatever. Ramdas, if everyone gets a chance to check out the documentary The House I Live In, it offers by far the most in-depth analysis of the failed war on drugs. So in general, I imagine discrimination behind marijuana, opium, and other stimulants. Yeah, especially crack versus cocaine. Cocaine versus crack cocaine, right? Rock cocaine. Uncut and refined cocaine, for sure. Yeah. I mean, the entire Nixon presidency is in the modern, we'll call it the modern era. I don't know if that's necessarily how political scientists view US history, but as far as I'm concerned, modern era, last 50 years, by far one of the more racist presidents that we've had. The last one, notwithstanding that argument, miles away, in my opinion. I just want to lay that out there. That is my opinion. Does not reflect anybody else's. It's mine. It demonstrable, but you know, you could disagree, and that's fine too. So cannabis here. So this is by Box Brown. His name is Brian, but he goes by Box Brown. I don't know what this. I mean, he has a couple of other books, but let me just show you this book because I love it. So this is what I was reading today. And Tina, if you're still there, this is what I was reading while you guys were playing Monopoly today. In any case, it's a very cool book. It's literally just represented in comic form in this. And so here, history is unclear about who discovered cannabis and who first consumed it. But what we do know, how they got high, because I got high, right? Says exactly how it works. And there is literally only one panel about its biological mechanism, and that's this one right here. Anandamide. Suck at pronouncing this. So we have our own cannabinoid in our brain, in our body, anandamide, that is the perfect fit for THC. Perfect fit. Lock and key. Lock and key, perfect fit. And when you get an influx of THC into those cannabinoid receptors, that's what makes you feel good. That's the euphoria one. Now, of course, like I said, this book only has one panel, and that is literally this one here about it. And then some creativity about what else it does. Ability to detect pain was dulled and her mood was elevated, and you can see he's clearly eating an apple. And then all of these other things. Oh my God. But then some people got sad or got panicked, increased their sensitivity to pain, because that, generally speaking, is what happens if you consume too much THC. And nowadays, since we don't really know potency in any given strain, it's sort of just it's a kind of a numbers game, but really doesn't map on to dosage of like prescription medications. But this was the coolest thing about it. It goes through the history of the Hindus and their religious creation story, we'll say, of where cannabis came from. Where cannabis came from. Like the whole thing about Vishnu and Shiva and the churning of the world in the milk ocean. All of that creating what they called, let me see if I can find it. I'm probably going to pronounce it wrong. So Shiva was the one who planted cannabis, and you see it's growing. Dang it. Okay, I already bought it, but I wonder if I can. I already have it. Cloud Reader. Yeah, but see, I already have it. I don't know how this works. I already bought it. All right, whatever. Forget it. It's called Bagdu. Yeah, it doesn't say it here. I knew it. I knew I was gonna forget how to pronounce it. Because I mean, it's a Hindu word. An ancient Hindu word. But in any case, that creation story literally includes cannabis. So I just think I think that's just really cool. And then this comes up later when the British are occupying India. Like in the late 1800s, they were occupying India, and they saw all of these healer dudes using cannabis and these giant horns that they had to hold with rags because the smoke, when they burned so they put the cannabis in the top, and then they lit it on fire, finally ground it up, lit it on fire, and let the smoke come down into the horn, and then they smoked it from there. And they were able to just have a ton of fun. Just like a ton of fun. And the Indians, or the British, saw them doing that, and they were like, yeah, we don't like them doing that. What's this substance that they're on? Yeah. So I know that people don't get addicted to marijuana like other illegal drugs, but comfort eating and many other things, people can develop a dependence to help them feel better. Is that true? Is it true? So, Psych Queen brought up psychologically addictive rather than physically. So physically addictive substances generally have tolerance and withdrawals. Unless you're a heavy user of cannabis, that is unlikely to occur. Psychologically addictive, jury's still out on that. Jury's still that. It's as psychologically addictive as many other psychoactive substances. And here's the thing. If a psychoactive substance makes you feel good, like cannabis does, that dopamine boost that you get is rewarding. Getting dopamine flushed through your system is going to make you feel good, in addition to the euphoria and everything that you're feeling from the cannabis itself. And so wanting to do that again feels really, really good. And that's a really powerful, that's how most of our learning occurs on a biological level. So all of the operant conditioning, the reinforcement, the punishment, all of that does occur on a biological level with dopamine. And so it's honestly, cannabis is as psychologically addictive as many other psychoactive substances are. And that's just the nature of psychoactive substances. I wouldn't say it's any more psychologically addictive than any other things. And I'd like to definitely contrast it, which is why I decided to bring the wine into the discussion. It's a nice red that we got from we got a special deal on a box of wine. A box of wine. That sounds terrible. That sounds terrible. No, a box of like hand selective wines, right? But I wanted to contrast the history of this stupid thing. Even though it tastes good, it's still far more psychologically and way more physically addictive. And yet we have such a total different sense of this versus marijuana. Yeah, ventral tegmental area. Oh, Psych Queen, you're fine. You're good. Yeah, don't worry about typing too much, especially those brain areas. Next, I would like you to type the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Go. So, the British were really the first, we're talking white people, were the first to really think about how they could navigate this different culture, and the fact that this different culture was doing a bunch of weird stuff. And so what they did was they went around and they created a survey. And I gotta say, if the questions that are in this book are to be believed, the most leading questions ever. So, does this cannabis stuff make people violent? I mean, how am I supposed to answer that? Does it make people go wild during the day? You know, instead of asking, what does it do? How does it make you feel? They asked preconceived notion questions, and they got the preconceived notion responses, which really led to its, not its ban, but like the British were like, we don't know about this thing. We want to regulate it. Yeah, their withdrawal for heavy users, Ramdas. Yeah, you're right about that. Mm-hmm. It's heavy users, though. Only heavy users. And heavy users is classified in this way as when we when we take into consideration what the definition of a heavy user is, and that is somebody who's basically high 100% of the time, for the most part. You know, it's the smoke 2 joints in the morning, smoke 2 joints at night, smoke 2 joints in the afternoon. It makes me feel all right, kind of smoking, kind of consuming, right? It's the reefer madness idea of usage. Yeah. In a Brit voice, will it lead to an overthrow of our rule in a peaceful way in 100 years? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Very, very leading questions. They're like, what are they gonna do? And this was, you know, late 1800s where they did this survey in the Bengal region of India, where a lot of cannabis and where cannabis was being made. Cannabis indica, specifically. Cannabis indica. So before this, about 200 years before this, though, and this is where the real story of racism starts with respect to this single plant. So Cortez, you may be familiar with Hernan Cortés coming to Mexico. With him, he had cannabis sativa seeds. Because the early history of cannabis in the United States was all about what hemp could do for you. It's hilarious, but the ships that brought the Spaniards to Mexico had sails made out of hemp. So cannabis sativa was being used to cultivate these really big plants, these really tall plants that had long stalks, wide-leaved leaves, as wide as cannabis can grow, of course, and very weak flowers, very weak buds. So they were cultivating large stalks so they could create ropes, sails, pretty much everything on the ship that they would need, clothes, all that stuff. So they were growing a ton of hemp in Mexico. And none of it was being used for smoking. That wasn't even what it was there for. And yeah, Ramdas, hemp grew really well in the Upper South, Virginia area, yeah. A lot of hemp. And hemp was really a cash crop. That was really what it was for. And that was how the Spaniards were really bankrolling this conquest of the Americas starting in Mexico for sure. And then, you know, obviously that whole thing with, you know, killing and destroying the entire Aztec Empire as a result, of course. Right. So that's where it really starts. But some native Mexicans started to recognize that sometimes they didn't grow so small or so big. They grew very small, and specifically some female plants were growing small enough, but with giant flowers on them, giant flowers. And that's what you know as bud, right? That's why one of marijuana's nicknames is bud. Because you're gonna do that. You're gonna smoke the flower, and it's an odd looking flower. I'll admit the bud is really weird looking, but it's an odd flower, and it had a very distinct pungent smell to it, And this is part of the history. This is how you could detect how people were engaging in the behaviors because of the smell, right? So termed skunk because it has a similar odor palette to a skunk spray, right? And so these native Mexican farmers were like, this is interesting. And when they would light them on fire to get rid of them, it would create that early contact high, and they just decided, you know what, let's give this a shot, because they were already familiar with like mescaline and peyote, because those go way back in Native American history, so they are already aware of how this stuff worked, and so they did it and they started using it. And it's funny. The Spaniards didn't really care that much. They didn't really care. They were like, yeah, whatever. But the church, the Catholic Church, was kind of like, but still did not explicitly say no. And this is where the word marijuana comes from. It comes from young Native Mexicans, and that is, different generations of intermingling and interracial marriages and interracial children coming into the world, using the crop in the same way, so on and so forth. While the church still had its like really strong hold over the region. And so the nickname marijuana came from them hiding, these young Native Mexicans hiding the fact that they were using they were smoking the drug by tying it to names. Oh, Father, we were just hanging out with Maria Juana. Maria and Juana. There you go. There's marijuana. It's just a shortening of two Spanish names, Maria and Juana. Marijuana, right? Free the Native American Church. Hell yeah, man. So Maria and Juana got shortened to marijuana, and there you go. That's where it came from. Now, on a side quest here, because we're not even at this history yet, but I will tell you that that between the 1600s and the 1890s, everyone was down with hemp. Everyone was down with hemp. This is a timeline from Frontline from PBS. Everyone was a fan of hemp, especially after the Civil War. Even though after the Civil War, everyone was down with morphine, to be honest with you. But marijuana was sold openly, and I am doing with hemp now? What does that even mean? Are you down with hemp now? I think is what you meant, Tyrion. Welcome in. CPP, that's me. I'm doing another psychoactive substance. One that won't get me in trouble. Doing it down. You're down with those typos recently. With respect to saying things to me, I think that's hilarious. I don't know if this is big enough, actually. I'll make this bigger, guy. I hate that it makes the aspect ratio like terrible, though. There we go. That can hide. We can do that. There you go. Hemp was allowed and exchanged as legal tenure in Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Maryland. There you go. So up until this time, it was not illegal, frowned upon by church leaders, but not illegal. But it started changing turn of the century when, especially when white settlers from eastern portions of the United States started pushing out Mexicans from original Mexican lands. So we're talking about Texas. We're talking about what is now Arizona, New Mexico, California. Started pushing them out and imposing their laws, especially in Texas. You know, the whole thing with like Texas is a republic. Oh wait, maybe we should be part of the United States. El Paso was actually the first city in the United States to ban marijuana, and make it a crime to smoke it. First city in the United States to do so. And that's when the whole hemp market started to collapse, because what happened was that the narrative now became only Mexicans do it. And that's the first bit of U.S. racism for marijuana, because it was called marijuana, so it was immediately tied to Hispanic populations and Native Mexican populations, right? So by white Americans, and then because after the Civil War, you had Black Americans, recently freed slaves, gaining land everywhere in the South. You had the confluence of field workers. They were sharing work in fields. So we had the immigrant, they were there first, but we had immigrant Mexican populations working low-paying jobs in the fields. And we had now we had new recently freed slaves, sharecroppers, new landowners who were Black. Confluence. The Mexicans shared this amazing drug with them that'll make them relax after a long ass day, right? A long ass day working in the fields, doing hard labor. This will make you feel better. This will take the edge off. Let's share some joints. And that's where pass the joint sort of came from. It's just these sharecroppers in the field lighting up a joint and passing it around. Pass the doochie, you know? And then saving the roach, like the very last bit. Saving that roach for the next day and taking hits off the roach, and then when it's all gone, you know, using every last bit of these joints, as opposed to how cigarettes were consumed, how tobacco was consumed, and that you just toss it because they were a dime a dozen. They were probably cheaper than that, to be honest with you, dime a dozen. So now Black Americans were consuming it. Mexicans were consuming it. Instead of using a J in marijuana, they started using an H. They, being white Americans, started using an H to very clearly connect it with Spanish and connect it with Mexicans. And in the American South, there was a great explosion of new kind of music, jazz. And you know who didn't like jazz? White people. They're like, what the hell is this? I don't know. I don't know why you would be so sad about jazz, right? But that's how it proliferated within the Black community. Jazz. New Orleans being the hotspot for both. For jazz, Louis Armstrong. Louis Armstrong was arrested. He was arrested after the where is it? It's not on here. That's a bummer. That's not on here. There was a intermediate law, not the Pure Food and Drug Act. That's not what it is. That's not what it was. It was a precursor to the Cannabis Taxation Act. And I'm not remembering the name itself, but the Cannabis Taxation Act. Is it on here? Yeah, no. Oh yeah, there it is. Marijuana Tax Act, 1937. So shortly after that, Louis Armstrong was arrested. I think in 1940 something. Hilarious. Anyways, Louis Armstrong and the thanks for the lurk, Tyrion. No worries. Louis Armstrong was arrested by a white police officer in New Orleans for possessing marijuana. And the arresting officer said, "We'll do this as quietly as possible because me and my family are big fans of yours." And so they took him out the back. They let him finish his set. They took him out the back and they quietly put him in a cop car, and he served a little bit in jail, not like at the county lockup, not in prison. He never served prison time for it. I'm sure everyone would know about it if he had served prison time, I'll be honest, because this is the first that I had heard of Louis Armstrong, the godfather of jazz in the United States. I don't know why Jesus is auto-modded. There you go, Natty. Yeah, isn't that wild? It's the wildest thing. So like he gets arrested for possession. Godfather of jazz arrested for possession of marijuana. It's so crazy. But in any case, that actually happened because of it being demonized and villainized starting in the 1930s. And there is one figure. His name is Anslinger. Harry J. Anslinger becomes the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, and he had it out for weed. He came up with the most wild stories about it. He would just say, it makes you violent. Listen to this. It makes you crazy violent. It makes white women sex fiends, and so they'll go to jazz clubs and they'll listen to these guys, these black guys, play their instruments, and they'll tell them their woes and pass the doochie. And then these women, boom, pregnant. And of course, being pregnant with a black child at the time was not great, according to many people, including Anslinger. Violent, psychotic, wild. He tells a story. He warps a story about this guy who killed his family in what appears to be a psychotic break. But he uses this story, and this is the craziest story I've ever read, both in truth and in fiction. So Anslinger sends out his agents to go interview this guy who brutally murdered his family. And the story that they hear from this guy is that he murdered his family because his family cut off his arms on purpose and replaced them with metal rods. So he had stumps at his armpit, his elbow, and he had rods with metal claws at the end of it, both arms. And they were laughing at him about it. And so in revenge, he, with his claw arms, grabs an axe and brutally murders all of them for it. Like, as you do. And so the piece of the puzzle that Anslinger needed to fill in, erroneously, fraudulently, was that he had smoked weed before, and that was the reason why he had this psychotic break, believing that his arms were not metal rods with claws at the end of them. That wasn't real, right? This guy was in prison for doing that. Edward Metal Arms, yeah, right, with an axe, mind you. It was an axe. It was a giant axe. Is probably what they called him, yeah. So Anslinger was just like, yeah, he did weed, he became psychotic, and he murdered his family based on this like fantasy that he created in his own brain. This is what weed does to you, That's really all he needed to create this this specter. And he started blaming the people that were bringing it, that were cultivating it. He started saying that it was the Mexicans' fault and that jazz and jazz clubs were perpetuating it. It got all the way up to Chicago because of a jazz musician going up to Chicago, and it's invading our northern cities and all of this super racist garbage, right? And here, by 1931, 29 states had outlawed marijuana because of who was taking it. Who were referred to as racially inferior people. And all of this was perpetuated by Anslinger. And to his death, still believed in what he was doing, even though he fudged the facts consistently fudged the facts. And just because Roosevelt signed the Marijuana Tax Act in 1937, I don't know if Democrats actually, at the time, bought into it as much as very, very handful few, but it wasn't for a lack of trying. Anslinger constantly went to Congress and tried to talk to select committees on drugs, and eventually he was successful. Right, that's where 1937 Marijuana Tax Act came from. Right, so he was successful then, and he was successful in the 1930s, the 1940s, the 1950s. Truman signed, I will go down here. Truman signed the Narcotics Control Act, the Boggs Act first, and then the Narcotics Control Act, which created sentences. But I don't want to get ahead of myself there, because I want to talk about reefer madness before we go on. But Anslinger was the guy who was running this whole charade. He was friends with William Randolph Hearst. Yeah, that crazy newspaper owner. And they essentially created a fake news cycle, or no, cycle's not the right word. They created like anyways, Anslinger with Hearst created these series of stories where like the violence and the wildness and all of this crazy stuff was written about, all completely fabricated. Like, one of the things they said was it turns people into hogs. They were obviously playing on the fact that maybe a little bit of marijuana A little bit of marijuana makes you a little hungry and maybe makes you eat a little less eloquently. There's no problem with that, right? But my favorite one is, so back to India for a second. India had a word, hashish, that they used to refer to the oil and the really ground up substance of the bud. So they had hashish. So you smoked hashish. Now, they didn't call it weed or anything. They didn't call it marijuana in India. They weren't Mexican. They weren't speaking Spanish, right? So they, Anslinger and his cronies were like, you know what also sounds like hashish? This other word, this other Hindu word that sounds like assassin. And I can't remember, I'm not going to try to pronounce the other word because it's Hindu and I don't speak Hindu, so I'm not even trying to butcher it. But the idea was they had hashish, they had this other word, which is the root for assassin. And so what they were trying to do was they were trying to equate hashish with assassin. That doing hashish, smoking hashish, eating hashish led you to being a killer, a murderer. Like, what? And at this time, especially in the 1920s, when alcohol was also prohibited due to the idiots in states that decided, you know what we should do? We should do an amendment. Yeah, that's right, an amendment that says no alcohol. But then everybody's like, yeah, well, we're still going to drink it anyways because all I have to do is take some corn from my field or the potatoes that I'm growing over there and just let them ferment for a little while. Like, I can do that. And you won't know that I'm doing that. I mean, ethanol is a basic... Listen, ethanol is a basic substance, right? It's a basic molecule in the world, in the universe. And our species is very familiar with it. So much so that we have an enzyme that is supposed to break down ethanol. So we can use it in other ways. Like, we've come across it. And try to ban it. Obviously, that ban didn't work, but it was funny because the guys that were trying to round up all of the bootleggers and things like that, Al Capone and all that jazz, Anslinger called them and was like, yo, can you help us? And they're like, no, we're too busy with this alcohol prohibition thing. Yeah, Natty. Alcohol dehydrogenase. Yep. Indeed. Indeedy. I was just talking about that the other day. First pass metabolism on alcohol. Alcohol dehydrogenase. Oh, show. So we're talking about the sordid racist history of cannabis in the United States, but also around the world. Because by 1950, the world gets involved in this. The world does get involved in this. But to break this up, I'm sure many of you have heard. Yeah, I watched these earlier today.
That girl, Kelly McNamara, is a tramp. She was living in a single room with...
Hold on. I'm going to start that again. So, if you're familiar with the Toys, the reggae band, had a song called Smoke Two Joints, and then it was made more famous by Sublime, because it was their second song in 1994 to ever be played on the radio. Their first song was Date Rape, and their second song was Smoke Two Joints. Smoke Two Joints, the Sublime version, starts with this scene from Valley of the Dolls. And so, I mean, I know this scene by heart, but seeing it in context is really interesting. So the character of Porter Hall is the one who says all of this stuff. And he's actually in this movie, his character is a really skeevy lawyer. He wants to prevent the main character from getting inheritance by representing her mother's sister, so the main character's aunt. And so this guy is trying to play on this idea, and this movie is from the 1960s, is playing on this idea of the reefer madness that started in 1936 in Hollywood. And so these tropes ended up making their way into films, partly to be explained and discussed and dialogued by super racist characters, and especially those characters who thought those people were hippies. So not only was it Mexicans and African Americans using it, which was, saying that people with who were racially inferior who were using it, which was a catalyst for the fervor, the reefer madness part. But now it was also being tied to anti-government, anti-establishment people who were against nuclear nuclear proliferation. There we go. And they were against war, and they were against the man, the government, and everything like that. And so I know this line by like the back of my hand because of how many times I've listened to Smoke Two Joints. But it's good to see it in context sometimes. So if you're familiar with the song, here's the actual scene. Now, I'm only specifically talking about the Sublime version. The Toys version does not have this intro scene.
Susan Lake. That girl, Kelly McNamara's a tramp. She was living in a single room with 3 other individuals. One of them was a male, and the other 2? Well, the other 2 were females. God only knows what they were up to in there. And furthermore, Susan, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised to learn that all 4 of them habitually smoke marijuana cigarettes. Reefers.
Hi, my name's Kelly McNamara.
And that's Kelly.
Hi, I'm glad to know you.
He literally just called her.
Turn on.
The rest of the scene goes like they actually have a back and forth, and he calls her a hippie, and it's hilarious. It's hilarious. Okay, pause in here for a sec. Social work. Define automatic bias as an assumption about a person due to the group they are a part of. So assuming because someone is black, they are dangerous, therefore they could have a gun on them. Would I be correct? Yeah, so that all of that coalesces together, Tina. So first it starts with the stereotype that African Americans are dangerous, and they carry those kinds of things. They carry guns because they come from poor neighborhoods, and poor neighborhoods have crime problems. And then because you see this person, you immediately, and obviously society has a role in perpetuating that idea, right? And so if you have learned that explicitly or implicitly, that's going to get activated when you see that person. So that would be part of the automatic bias. And now what does that do to your response? Well, it's going to change your behavior, and you're not going to be able to stop that behavior, because that implicitness is going to come and make you act in the way that in the automatic way that you want, which, as evidence has shown over and over again for the last 20 years of research, but I mean, obviously way before that too, like decades and decades and decades before that, it ends up with, black men being shot because you think that they're pulling stuff out of their pockets that could be weapons. And this really plays into the whole cannabis thing too, because if we go back here, we've got 1932, the Uniform State Narcotic Act. We've got Reefer Madness, which was a propaganda film. Propaganda. I don't know what I'm saying. And then, the MPAA was like, yeah, you're not allowed to show narcotics. Cannabis was classified as a narcotic in the Marijuana Tax Act. Weed was termed evil weed. All of these things that Anslinger was throwing out with the help of William Randolph Hearst was getting people to talk about it, especially white people, the people who were buying the newspapers and the magazines, right? Now, there were some people who were like, wait a minute, that doesn't seem to make sense. So former governor of New York, LaGuardia, for whom the airport is named in Queens, asked the New York Academy of Medicine to do a big study about it. And their conclusion was that it doesn't induce any violence. It doesn't increase insanity or sex crimes or lead to addiction or other drug use. Because by the 1940s, Anslinger saw public opinion, especially after LaGuardia's report came out, New York State, saw public support for his side waning, right? So that is anti-cannabis. And so he made up a new lie. He said, it's a gateway drug. And by far, that has been the most insidious lie and pervasive lie on cannabis to date, right? Some of the race stuff has melted away, especially with white, quote unquote, hippies beginning to use it. Okay. So some of the more racial aspects of it have melted away, but the gateway drug idea has stuck and has stuck really, 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 really high, right? So Anslinger pushed that hard, right? And then that's what led to him taking his idea to the United Nations at the same time as trying to convince U.S. lawmakers and the executive branch to, pass these laws to prohibit it and specifically disproportionately attack black and brown users. Now, what's his deal? Did he do it for the money or the fame? Did he actually believe his stuff? So on his deathbed, Anslinger, I guess in his obituary, he was yeah, that's right. In his obituary in 1956, I want to say, I think is when he died. He was 80 something. Somewhere around there. In his obituary, he was quoted as saying, so one of his last dying requests or dying wishes or whatever, he was quoted as saying that the fight needed to continue and that it was very important that we keep this down. So maybe he believed it. The problem is that confirmation bias was certainly ruling him. Because every time he saw a whiff of the illusory correlation of somebody with, pun intended, of somebody using and then some sort of violent act right afterward or nearby or some coincidental thing, just confirmed his prior beliefs that it was a dangerous drug. So I would imagine that he believed it to a point. He believed it to a point. And the poll closed again. We'll leave it up there. It closed. So I think he believed it somewhat. He was definitely a noted racist, Natty. He was definitely a noted racist. I think that was pretty clear in all the in when he talked to things, because in private, in private meetings with lawmakers, he would specifically name black and brown people as the culprits here, as the devils that are making or not making, but like persuading, cajoling unsuspecting white women, for example, into interracial sex or other such nonsense, right? So I think he believed it somewhat. The other things, I think, were on top of that, where he was searching for the thread of an illusory correlation. But the thing that stuck, the thing that ended up sticking, was the gateway drug that our unsuspecting teenagers will use cannabis, will smoke the evil marijuana, and that will lead to them using and abusing heroin. And heroin was generally the next level up in that argument, right? That slippery slope argument, the unfounded gateway drug argument. And you know, it turned out to be a bad deal for farmers because, again, hemp is a really good crop. Hemp itself, so hemp these days only refers to everything but the bud that gets ground up, and because it's so fibrous, gets turned into clothes. Those clothes last longer than cotton clothes. Hemp clothing is more sustainable. Especially when you think of cotton itself and how you can cut down an entire field of hemp, but when you're picking cotton, you gotta pick it carefully so you don't get thorned and all of that stuff. So I mean, it's a better product all around, and farmers really got the short shrift on this one because they weren't allowed to cultivate it anymore. That's a bummer, man. I mean, don't be fooled by this hemp for victory by the Department of Agriculture, because this was really just a war effort. After the war effort, they were like, no, you can't grow it anymore, which sucks, right? Sucks for those farmers. 1951 or 1952, 1956 finally gave mandatory sentences to marijuana. All of this stuff. Cotton is now harvested by machines. Hydro cannabinoid. Oh, I see the A right there. Yeah. Hydrocannabinoid. Yeah. It's now harvested by machines. But before, it had to be harvested by hand. All you had to do was take a scythe to a field of hemp. Yes, but now it's robots for sure. Yeah, big old farms. So 1952, 1956, we end up with two laws that bring about laws. Also, welcome to the stream, hydrocannabinoid. Welcome. First offense, possession, minimum 2 to 10 years. Minimum. This is Anslinger. Written all over it. Anslinger got these two laws on the books. And it was fermented and what's the word that I want? fomented. There we go. Fermented and fomented by Anslinger at Congress and with special meetings with Harry Truman, Dwight Eisenhower, etc. Fine of $20,000. Now we're talking early to mid 1950s. $20,000 was a giant amount of money that no reasonable person would have access to. No regular average Joe would have this to pay as a fine. So it was really about controlling immigrant and minority populations, specifically black and brown, as opposed to Asian immigrants, East Asian immigrants. They had their own issues with opium on the West Coast, but that's not the stream. And so in the 1960s, again, white counterculture began to use and be open about its use. It's where you got the marijuana leaf slapped onto counterculture. Huge display of it in 1969 at Woodstock, right? Pretty much everyone's high or doing something at Woodstock, and big counterculture push. And of course, the status quo folks, including Anslinger, were like, no, and Anslinger's spiritual successors. Now, at the same time, before Anslinger's death, in New York, the United Nations headquarters was being built. Headquarters were being built, and the idea here was, we got to get the world on board with what we're doing here in the United States, because, you know, this isn't going to work. This control of this evil weed isn't going to work until we get the rest of the world on board. And I mentioned at the top of the stream where India is really has really an amazing birthplace of story of cannabis, right? Now, as members of the United Nations, have to make a decision. Do we buy into this UN resolution that countries sign on to, kind of like the Paris Climate Accords, right? Where we schedule, this is where the scheduling comes from, where we schedule cannabis and other cannabis derivatives as no medicinal value and highly addictive. So in the UN resolution, it was Schedule 4 was the highest, and then 1 was the second high. I don't know why they did this, but Schedule 4 was the highest, Schedule 1, 2, and then 3. I don't know why they did this. I'm glad I'm not glad the United States did this, but at least the United States made it readable, right, with their scheduling in 1970. And that's basically the law we currently have. Hey, Charneski, what's up, man? Happy Wednesday. Totally team Legalized. Yeah. The poll mate doesn't do a very good job of just letting me have the poll active all the time. So that was the second time. But yeah, everyone's a fan of legalizing right now. So I've seen no no's. Yeah. So the UN resolution scheduled these drugs, put marijuana with some of the bigger narcotics like heroin, highly addictive, no medicinal value whatsoever, right? Whatsoever. And India, spiritual birthplace of specifically cannabis indica, hence the name indica, because that's where it was classified. Sativa. All right. So India was like, we need to get exemptions, man. We need to get exemptions with this stuff. They did for Bagda, the derivative of cannabis indica that they make, right? So they were able to do that, but the rest of it had to be scheduled just like everywhere else in the world, signing on for that UN resolution. So Anslinger got his way several times. I was reading the book and I was like, holy shit. Why does this guy keep winning? It's the worst guy to win every single damn time. But I think the worst thing came in 1970. Yeah, he was #winning, and it's just like, oh my God, I am so tired of it right now. So India thinks Mary Jane is a gateway drug. I don't know if current India thinks that, or current Indians think that. But I will say that they are still part of that UN resolution, continuing resolution. And because if you look at legalization across the world, there are very few countries that have legalized it for recreational use. Jumping in midway here. Yeah, no. No, we're in the 1970s now. We've jumped. So India is the spiritual birthplace, Eric, of cannabis. At least as a creation story. Cannabis sativa has its birthplace in the Americas, even though it's from Europe, because of the seeding from Cortez conquest, the conquistadors' conquest of Mexico. But Indians used primarily cannabis indica, and they made derivatives of it. One of them was Bagda, which they used a lot. And the British didn't like that. So white people just saw brown people using this drug, and they were like, nah, we don't like that, see? We don't like that. So 1970 is where it all, where it has been now, where it's been now. That isn't very Puritan of you. It's very true. He says as he drinks his glass of wine. Ah. 1968, the year that Nixon was first elected, Federal Bureau of Narcotics becomes the Bureau of Dangerous Drugs of the Food and Drug Administration. So the Food and Drug Administration subsumes FBN. 1970, though, most mandatory minimums got taken away, but the Comprehensive Drug Abuse Prevention and Control Act, which is the current law that exists because it continues to be renewed, scheduled cannabis, scheduled marijuana as a Schedule 1 narcotic. The narcotic itself means that it has no medicinal value and it is highly addictive. Schedule 1. But it eliminated mandatory federal sentences. But that for small amounts. So if you had large amounts, you were still going to get in trouble for it. But here's the thing. State laws also differed from this law. But I want to give you some backstory to this particular law because it's not on this timetable. The particular law Nixon signed into law. So he asked the Food and Drug Administration, he asked a group of scientists at the FDA as part of the Bureau of Dangerous Drugs to make a report about marijuana. he was looking for an easy way to to bring all of these drugs into one law for controlled substances. So he brought in this team to look into the evidence, the collective evidence that the United States had about marijuana. And they gave this report back to him. And they said, marijuana should be de-emphasized. You shouldn't even talk about it anymore. None of the things that you've heard, Mr. President, are true. It doesn't make you violent. It doesn't make you insane. It doesn't make you, it doesn't make you, it's not addictive. And there is no evidence that use of it leads to other narcotics like heroin, other stronger and harder narcotics. That was contained in this report. Nixon frickin' hated that. He threw it in the trash. He threw it in the trash because he was racist and he wanted a reason to blame black and brown Americans and immigrants. He wanted a reason, and that's the reason that he was looking for. He was looking for marijuana to be that reason. And when this report came on his desk, he was like, oh, hell no, not in my house. And then he threw it in the trash. Yeah, exactly, Natty. Politicians ignoring science? What? They don't do that. That's crazy. What is this guy talking about? What is this guy talking about? And so then Nixon signed this the Drug Control Act, as it's shrunk down into. Gotta send Melko after them. Exactly. Oh man, he work with the DEA. That's where he should go. He should go to the DEA. Tell them no. This marijuana thing. No. So Nixon, he goes up for re-election, 1972. He forms the DEA, becomes its own thing in 1973, as you can see, right? Because it's the merger of the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, which was formed in 1968. And the Office of Drug Abuse Law Enforcement, ODALE, the BNND, the BND, and the ODALE becomes the DEA. And he says, in public, we're gonna get rid of the scourge of this marijuana from these communities. It's not a very good Nixon. It's not. I didn't say it was gonna be good. So he goes on television and he says, drugs are bad. And we're gonna get them. And then that was his push for why he created the DEA. Eric, is it addictive as in not chemically addictive? People get addicted to things without chemical dependence, right? So I mentioned earlier in the stream that there is some evidence of physical and psychological dependence. So heavy users can have withdrawal symptoms, which is the sign that you are physically dependent on something. But we're talking heavy users. We're talking people who are high most of the time. And not just like, I'm going to take a slight edge off high, like high during the day. That's what constitutes heavy use for marijuana. It is, its heavy use is different from other classifications of heavy use. So for alcohol, there are two kinds of heavy users, right? There are binge drinkers, and then there are also functioning alcohol users or functioning alcohol use disorder individuals. I don't want to call them alcoholics because that's not really a good term anymore. And as far as psychological dependence goes, I mentioned that, yeah, it's psychologically dependent in the same way that other psychoactive substances are psychologically addictive. Because if the psychoactive substance makes you feel good, it's going to kick in the dopamine reward system, and that makes you feel good. You like that sensation, in addition to the euphoria that is being created by the cannabinoids, right? Just like you like the sensations that you get from ethanol shutting down your neuron communication, right? Because it inhibits you, and that makes you feel good. So it's going to create that dopamine feedback loop that you love so much, because you love dopamine so much. So that's what I'll say about its psychological dependence. Now, you could convince yourself that I can't feel good or I can't be calm unless I'm high, which, if that is affecting... So here's the other thing that I'll say. Clinical addiction requires something very important, because I don't want to be pathologizing life, especially with drug use, because I am a firm believer in live and let live. And then if you want to use the substance in a moderating and helpful way, I'm not going to stand in the way of you for doing that. I will warn you, if you use too much, it could lead to problems. So if you use too many opioids, you could end up having an OD and dying because of what opioids do to the pons and medulla, reducing heart rate and breathing, right? So I'm gonna go on a limb and say, yeah, go use those things. Clinical addiction becomes a problem. Anything clinical becomes a problem when it negatively interferes with your life, right? When there are negative impacts, when you're losing friendships, when you're failing at your job or failing at school, these negative life impacts could reflect dependence in a way that is clinical. But for the casual user, for the person who just wants to take the edge off from the day, whether it's, smoking a joint, taking a hit from a vape pen, taking an edible, drinking wine, all of those things, if you're doing it in moderation, far be it from me to tell you no. Just be careful. Just be careful. Thanks, Ramdas, for saying my Nixon was Nixonian. Oh, man. This was fun. This is fun, guys. I can stay on for maybe about 10 or so more minutes, because I do want to get to where we're at now with the legalization debate. So 1974, High Times, great day in weed, right? Hey, Open Set, welcome to the channel. Sounds like I got here late. That's all right. That's all right. You can still add. We're at modern history now. So if you have some modern history that you'd like to share. Yes. Earlier today. Hold on. Oh, that was probably super loud. Sorry, everyone. That's me trying to impersonate a bong. My bad. I didn't realize how loud it was gonna be. So, all right. So we're in the 1970s. NIDA is created. So that's the National Institute on Drug Abuse, part of the National Institutes of Health. Still public attitude. And the one, and Charnesky, you mentioned this a bit ago with the gateway drug. Again, this gateway drug idea, parents. So you've probably heard, again, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, MAD, right? That organization was several organizations about trying to convince teenagers not to smoke weed, and I'll tell you a little bit about my life in high school. So I didn't smoke any weed in high school, but my friends did. No, MAD was not anti-weed. No. But I'm saying organizations like MAD for weed. Hey, Bill, thanks for the host. I hope you've been able to watch us tonight. So I didn't smoke any weed, mainly because I didn't like the sensation of smoke in my lungs. So yeah. And then, yeah, Dare was like, you gonna get drug addicted and turn into a criminal. I'm a police officer. You should trust me. Dare didn't work at all. Zero evidence that Dare prevented anybody from my generation, our generation, Charnesky, from doing it, right? Edibles were made for people like us, indeed. So my friends did. They did a lot. They smoked a lot of weed. I'm not gonna name any names, but my friends in high school smoked a lot of weed. I guess I was like the goody two shoes guy of the group. I was like, yeah, I'll be your lookout, I suppose. But like, I remember going to one of my friend's house on a weekend one day, and all of them were just stoned out of their minds. And I was like, what are we doing? And of course, they didn't really want to do anything. But the push in the 1980s and 1990s, along with DARE, drug abuse resistance education, was to prevent teenage use, right? To prevent quote unquote underage use, whatever that meant at the time. Because by that time, alcohol was 21 or older, and tobacco products were 18 or older. Now in the state of Illinois, where I am, tobacco products are 21 and older, and so are cannabis products. So everything's 21 and older now, except going and fighting in the military and paying taxes. Well, paying taxes, I guess, happens once you start making money, so you could even do that before 18. Being drafted, we'll say. Can you abuse a drug that isn't bad for you? Is it still abuse? That's a good question. That's a philosophical question, because then it would depend on what's the definition of abuse and abuse. What do I want to say? You stumped me. You stumped me. Yeah, I would go. Yeah, open set. That's, yeah. Yeah, I like that. I like that. Yeah. Because everything in moderation, right? Water in high enough quantities is bad for you, of course. Right? You don't want to inhale that either. But yeah. Everything, yeah, exactly. Everything can be poison if the dose is right. I like that. Yep. No, you cannot OD. There is zero evidence and zero reported cases of anybody ever ODing on cannabis. Now, I will say that if you take too much in one time, you increase exponentially the risk for a psychotic break. Now, that doesn't mean that the psychosis is going to last forever, but there is no evidence that you can OD, and if you have a psychotic break, will you harm yourself or other people? That depends on how much paranoia has been created during the psychotic break. So that I mean, hydrocannabinoid makes a great point. Holding your breath kills brain cells. Yeah. So tell that to David Blaine. You can be incapacitated. Yeah, that's for sure open set. But it didn't. But because Cannabis works on our endocannabinoid systems. No endocannabinoid systems are associated with depression of our important systems, like in the medulla, controlling heart rate and breathing. So that's the big difference between cannabis incapacitation and opioid incapacitation. Smoking lots, yeah. So one of the newer things that has been found is that if you get poorly made vape oil that has vitamin E in it, this was a thing about a year and a half ago. If you got unregulated vape oil that cannabis oil that had vitamin E as an emulsifier, that vitamin E does not get cleared out from your alveoli in your lungs, and so that creates breathing problems. And some people have died from that, but that wasn't the cannabis's fault. That was the vitamin E, right? But then on the other hand is that joints themselves, as unregulated, right? You just get some bud and you roll it in, could have some unknown carcinogens in it. I will say though that it depends on that. From my reading, it depends on that. And when you compare it to tobacco products, right? Are you smoking a blunt, which is tobacco and cannabis together? Are you just smoking a joint? Like, how are you inhaling it is the point about that. But lung cancer is a potential issue down the road. Yeah. Yeah, shut down vape sales in Michigan for a while. Oh, it did? Really? Of nicotine, right? Edibles all the way. They're making crazy stuff. So, I mean, the OG baking, brownies, cookies, etc. But then now you have gummies. You can get tinctures, so actual tinctures instead of fake unicorn horn tinctures. What? Yeah, my wife. Unicorn horns aren't real? What did that guy sell me? They're making mints. They're making you could just like literally take a pill of fine bud and you just pop the pill and then your stomach will do all the work. You can get oils, cooking oils, burning oils, rubbing oils, ointments. You can do a lot with it. It's a very versatile product. Like it goes wherever you need it to go. You can get suppositories. You can go wherever it needs to go. I love that. Exactly. Get this pot right up your tot. They make so much weird stuff right now. Yeah, they do. They do. Like the marijuana industry has come so far from Mexico, right? From, the 1600s in Mexico. Shampoo. Yeah. And I mean, there's a whole other side industry of CBD, right? Of cannabidiol and the stuff they do with that. Yeah, so Eric, the ones that you want to get, if you want to get a little bit of high, but some pain relief and some anxiety reduction, some calming stuff, then you want to get the 1-to-1 ratios, because the more CBD there is in a strain, the less psychoactive THC is going to be. They are inversely proportional to one another in their effects. So you can get high CBD content, which isn't going to make you high, You can get 1-to-1, which has a nice blend of both. And then you could just get the normal high THC potency stuff. Oh, yeah. And if you get too high, so if you're like, oh, I'm getting a little paranoid here, you can pop in some CBD and take yourself back down a little bit. Where do they sell the suppositories? In hospitals. Why not, right? I honestly don't know who's selling suppositories, but I have seen them. Yeah, THC, most hydrocannabinoid, most of the phyto 100 plus varietals of cannabinoids pass the blood-brain barrier for sure. Yeah. That's why it's psychoactive. Yeah. So anything that passes the blood-brain barrier is psychoactive in some way. So sugar, glucose is psychoactive. Oh, yeah. That sweet, sweet sugar. Oxygen is psychoactive. Hell yeah. My mom came back from a work conference in Denver with an ankle injury. Ooh, boy. And THC-based ointment for it. Oops. Totally not realizing. Just bought it right through airport security in the state where it's illegal. Oh. I've known some people who have taken, so when it was legal in California, and was brought to a state, Wisconsin, where it's still not recreationally legal, but medicinally legal. They were gummies, and so just like put it with candy, and that's it. Right? I've tried a few ratios. The higher THC just puts me to sleep. Yeah, it also depends on what kind you're taking too. So there's generally 3 that you'll see at dispensaries, medicinal or recreational. You'll see sativa, which if you're just, so the 1-to-1s are high CBD varietals, notwithstanding. So if you see the sativa ones, those are generally the energetic highs, more head highs, being amped, that sort of thing. Then you have indica strains, which generally are the more calming. This is, like I said, the stuff from India. The more calming, the more soothing, the one that puts a lot of people to sleep. And then you have hybrids, which are a mixture of both. And because cultivation has been so unregulated for so many decades, it's hard to know what exactly you're getting. And so that's what the hybrids are all about, is just like it's a mixture of all of it. It's a mixture of all of it, and you'll get a mixture of effects and a mixture of effects from it. And then the 1-to-1s, of course, will make you feel good. And then, but you know, your back doesn't hurt while sleeping. So yeah, hashtag winning. And if you feel better in the morning for it, then shoot, do what you want, man. It's good. CBD mix is really good for painkillers. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's open set. I'm still laughing at that one. Did she tell you? Did she tell you that she took it and how it made her feel afterward? That conversation must have been hilarious. I can only imagine, because here's the conversation that I had with my parents, who were very, I'll say, anti-drug while we were teenagers. My sister and I, who is 2 years older than me, she was the much bigger partier than me. I went, I head in my book and that kind of thing, big old nerd about stuff. And so they were fairly, at least what I can tell, fairly anti-drug. But as soon as as soon as I think we were over. Okay, so Illinois legalized on January 1st, 2020, and it's like we were there in Christmas, and they live in Wisconsin, so they live a few hours north of us, over the border, and they knew that it was getting legalized because Wisconsin gets a lot of Illinois news because of Chicago. And, and legalizing recreational marijuana is huge deal, right? Especially for the region. And so we were there for Christmas, and my dad goes, so have you bought a bunch of weed yet? And I was like, what? It's not legal yet, dude. Okay, let me know when you're super high. I'm like, what? No, she didn't realize it was illegal. Caught it when she showed me telling a story of her ankle injury. She was a hippie back in the day, but very anti-drug for a long time now. Oh, so who ended up using the ointment? That's awesome. Oh, man. Imagine if she had gotten caught. I didn't know. Is she anti-Tylenol and ibuprofen? It's like, bruh, you could have just used those things. Or was it a really bad ankle injury? That's so funny. Oh, man. So, in 1996, my home state of California passed Proposition 215, which legalized medical use in California. Marijuana legalization. And there's a map in this one. Yeah, here it is. This map right here. So I wanted to bring up this map. I'm going to hide that. Where are you? Pole Mape. Go away. So here is the current map of the United States as far as legalization is concerned. Right, so here I am, nice and blue. There's Michigan Charnesky, right? The blue hand. 96, first state to legalize medical marijuana. And that's because in 1970 something, a white dude was arrested for possession and cultivating a cannabis plant on his sun porch. And so obviously that was available to everyone to see from the street. And they were like, the cops were like, you can't do that. You can't cultivate your own weed. And he's like, I've got glaucoma. And so that went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled in his favor. So obviously he was, released from all of his he was released from his conviction, and all of that was expunged and all of that. And so finally in 1996, California legalized medicinal use, right? And then so this is the current state. I really love this article on Wikipedia because they update it constantly as, laws in various states are changing. And New York, one of the new ones on the blue list here. It's awesome. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. New York added to it. I was talking about Charnesky's post there, but Idaho. So we got to talk about Idaho. Idaho needs some help. Needs a come to Jesus moment here. Because it's the only place. But anyways, we need to have a come to Jesus moment here with Idaho, because at least Nebraska has decriminalized it, but honestly, Idaho has done nothing. It is still as illegal in Idaho as it is in the entire United States, which of course it is not federally legal for any kind of use, even medicinal use. It is still classified marijuana is still classified as a Schedule 1 drug, according to the Drug Control Act. But if you take a look here, so on this legend here, so blue is legal, so recreationally, we've got the entire West Coast, including Alaska. Okay, not Hawaii though. I think Hawaii needs to get a little on board here, considering what it is and where it is. But Guam and the U.S. Virgin Islands, recreationally legal, right? We've got Nevada, we've got Arizona. Arizona's a wild one to me, to be honest with you. Arizona's crazy. That one's wild. But look at Utah. Utah is legal for medical use. And this is really important in a state like Utah, where Mormons, when they were trying, when Utah outlawed polygamy, the Mormons went to Mexico, but they didn't like the Mexicans doing marijuana. So they went back to Utah, and that's when they were like, you can't do any of that stuff. And then the Utah legislature took Mormon principles and codified them as state law. So this is really crucial for something like Utah. However, if you do not have a medical card, it is not decriminalized. You don't see a D here like you see in New Mexico. So that's real. That's a real problem, right? That's a real big problem. And then in these you can see these light green states, medicinal use, but lower quantities of THC, which to a lot of people isn't all that helpful, because one of the major things that THC does in your brain is reduce the pain by dilating your blood vessels. Bummer. The weird one on the map is Alaska. Really open set. Wouldn't expect them to be a member of the leading blue edge. Yeah. I mean, it is strange that Alaska's like, yeah, let's just do it. I mean, same with same in my eyes, Montana. But Alaska is Alaska is not like, but politics in Alaska are not like the lower 48 for sure. I mean, Lisa Murkowski may be a Republican in the Senate, but she is not conservative by any means. How conservatism shows itself in this part of, especially in this part of the United States, right? The actual South. So that's what I mean. I'm surprised, but I'm not surprised because of how Alaska operates. It's wild country up there. They're like, we'll do what we want, baby. Of lower 49, yeah. It could also be, I mean, yeah, I guess we don't, Puerto Rico's very far away, so maybe it wouldn't, I guess we wouldn't call it that. But yeah, it'd be the lower 49, which would be really, really interesting, right? If I recall correctly, political power in Alaska is based on how much of Russia you can see from your house. Yes, especially from little tiny towns like Wasilla. If Utah would only go back to their really good homeless policies. Oh, Natty, that's interesting. I should talk to my brother-in-law about that. So my sister and my brother-in-law live in Salt Lake, and he's from Salt Lake. Yeah, Alaska is very libertarian leaning. So I'm not super surprised about that. I am really surprised that Hawaii hasn't put it forth yet, either as a vote of the legislature, like a law like Illinois did, or New York, or like a popular vote, like California and Colorado and Washington and Oregon and so on and so forth. Maine is also kind of funny. But you can clearly see there's a dearth of possibilities here in the middle part of the country and the southern part of the country. I wonder, we should ask Melko whether or not he's got a medicinal card here in Florida. Not decriminalized, though. So if you're caught and you don't have a medicinal marijuana card, you in trouble. You got to have the dark green with the D here for you to be, okay. They won't do anything. I don't have a medicinal card, but they won't do anything. Like the quantities of THC in Indiana are incredibly low. And it's not decriminalized. Incredibly low. I would much rather be caught in Nebraska than I would in Indiana. And that's the next state over for me. Or even Wisconsin, which is where my parents are. All right. I think it's my bedtime. So I am going to end the stream there. Thanks everyone for coming by and chatting cannabis with me. That's a really, really fun stream.